at the moment. And we've been bringing students in since the end of September to do tape testing, just because we need to have their tape scores for the new fiscal year, and not everyone has online access. So, and it also gives us a chance to kind of start building connections with students, which is harder to do in virtual space. And one of the students who came in for assessment yesterday, when she came in for orientation, which I do virtually every Monday, I recognized her, but I couldn't quite put a face to a name because there were so many things happening in orientation. You know, you've all experienced getting students on Zoom and having the world going on around them. So when she came in yesterday, I looked at her and I recognized her, and she was a high school classmate in my GED program. That's the second time that's happened. So the first time was I got my first job working in adult literacy. And the students, I had a class of 7 students, all women with children. Their young children were in a program downstairs, so we were a family literacy program. And the students kept saying, oh, well, I hope Jackie's coming back. I hope Jackie comes back. I wonder if Jackie's coming back. And one day I walked in and it was almost like I had been dropped in the middle of a Western. You could see the, you could see the tumbleweeds rolling by and the saloon doors burst open and in comes the student. And I saw her and I recognized her from high school as well. So the first thing I did is kind of just shuffle her out to the hallway and say, hey, Jackie, I don't know if you remember me from Heights. I'm Carmen. The students in there don't know that you and I know each other, and they don't have to know. I'm just happy to see you here, and let me know what anything I can do to help you. So Jackie was there for maybe a week and a half, and then she disappeared again. Okay. So, and I actually, they had another teacher from January to March, and that teacher just left on one Friday and said she wasn't coming back. So here I come as a new teacher. She was there for a week and a half and then she was gone and she never came back again. So fast forward that to me moving to Tri-C Cuyahoga Community College, where Salome is an administrator. And I was working with students there, and they were working on a group assignment, and I asked them they kept asking me, Miss Carmen, how do you spell this? Miss Carmen, how do you spell? And I would say, well, what do you hear? And I realized that the students weren't able to spell because they didn't really have a phonics basis. So I ran into my computer and I quickly wrote up this phonics assessment and I gave it to them, and almost 100% of my students struggled with phonics. And that moment, I realized that Jackie didn't leave my program because of her son's medical issues. Jackie left my program because here's another teacher who hasn't figured out what I'm struggling with and isn't helping me. And from that moment on, I have put so much emphasis on teachers being proficient at reading instruction, because that is the thing that our students struggle with most. You hear students complain most about math, but they struggle most with reading, and they struggle most with reading because our schools are not designed to teach reading well in K-12. And our schools are designed to teach reading up until the kid is in 3rd grade, and then to use that reading as a foundation for everything they learn up through 12th grade, which means when you think about it, you have everything you're going to get by the time you're 8. If you don't have it by 8, your entire course of your future is going to go in a different direction, because you're not going to have anyone teaching you how to read in the higher grades. That's just the way that our schools are set up. So I've asked for folks to kind of give me an idea of where your students are, and a couple people have responded, and it looks like most of you have students who are, the majority of your students are on the 4th to 6th grade, but we all are teaching multi-levels. Okay, so before I really go too far, I actually am going to do this a little bit backwards and ask you all, let me know what are some of the key questions that you have in the beginning. And I'll make sure that I answer your questions before. If you have questions as you go along, you can put them in the chat. But if you have a deep burning question that you've been wanting to ask and you're hoping that this workshop answers, tell me that up front, and I'll address that in the beginning and then go through the things that I hope to cover. Like I said, I can talk about teaching reading for 8 hours straight. I've actually done it off the top of my head in California before. So I'm going to try to stick to my little presentation here, but I'm just going to tell you my head is really full this morning because of all the work I've been doing with our beginning readers this week. So in my role as Seeds of Literacy, I'm Vice President of Programming. One of the first initiatives that I just realized, Salome, we are not recording this session.
Oh, yes, we are. I already hit record. We are.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Okay.
You're welcome.
So, with all of the students that we have coming into our program now, a lot of our students are in that 0 to 3 range. And so it was very important to me to make sure that we were addressing those students, because formerly our policy was that we would send them to Project Learn. And just coming in as a new staff member, I thought that I cannot. It takes so much energy and courage already to come back and ask for help. And to come to, if they make their way to Seeds, we're going to serve them at Seeds. We're not going to send them to another program. And I just found out recently that that program has actually dissolved its basic skills program. So we wouldn't have anywhere to send them if we weren't doing the beginning reading program. So a lot of our students come to us at that 0 to 3 level, and they'll come in and they'll participate in orientation. And when I have a moment with them and start asking them about their reading, they'll say, well, honestly, here's what happened. And they have a story for why they feel they have failed at reading. And it never blames anyone outside of themselves. And what I know to be true is that if you talk to educators who are in K-12, they will tell you the students that they know that got away, fell through the cracks because they just didn't have the time and resources to help them. So I don't see any questions, which means you all want me to just go for my presentation, and that's perfectly fine. So let's talk about, we're going to talk about proficiency versus intelligence. We're going to talk about the 5 components of reading. I'm going to give you a tour of a resource that I think can be helpful for supporting reading instruction in the virtual space. And then if you have questions at the end, we can address those. So I'm going to ask, what does proficiency mean to you? And let me just go ahead and warn you, this is a very interactive session. I hope you don't think you're going to sit there and not participate. I really want you to participate. Don't make me call on people. If you could just put in the chat really quickly, what do you think proficiency means to you? What is proficiency? Are you guys gonna make me call on people? Okay, so all right, thank you very much, Christy Jones, that you have a good understanding of the content, achieving a certain level, right, proficiency. So let's talk about proficiency. So a lot of times people think about proficiency. Proficiency is kind of a range of things, right? And so there are folks who are on the lower end of being proficient at something, meaning that they've mastered it. And then there are folks who are on the high proficiency end of things. And there are things that all of us have high proficiency in. There, if you think about like dancing is something I have high proficiency in, teaching reading is something I have high proficiency in. And then there are things that we all have low proficiency in, right? So the way that I think of our students is this. When I ask this in a face-to-face workshop, I ask how many people have high proficiency in math. Pretty much if I ask people how many of them are highly proficient readers, and pretty much the room full of instructors will say, oh yeah, I'm a proficient reader. And then I'll say, how many of you are proficient in math? And all the hands will go down, right? So imagine that everything you do in your life, going to the grocery store, getting your driver's license, registering your kids for kindergarten, ordering food in a restaurant. Imagine that every one of those tasks required you to solve a quadratic equation, right? So if you had to do the one thing that you don't have high proficiency in every time you needed to get something done, how frustrating would life be for you? That's exactly how our learners with low reading proficiency feel, because all of life is dependent on being able to read. We have a student right now who's from Tanzania. He was a very successful businessman there because their economy wasn't dependent on the written word. And now here in America, he's got to learn to read and write in English proficiently. And it really is a challenge. So now let me ask, do you think that proficiency is the same as intelligence? Is proficiency the same as intelligence?
Yeah.
Anyone? Definitely not. Okay, so keep in mind when you're working with readers who have low reading proficiency that their issue is not intelligence. Their issue is that English is a crazy, crazy complex language, and they haven't learned the code for breaking down the English language, no fault of their own. So if you walk away with nothing else, remember that low proficiency does not equal lack of intelligence, okay? So there are actually 5 components to reading. There's phonemic awareness, there's phonics, there's fluency, there's vocabulary, and there's comprehension, okay? So phonemic awareness is understanding that there are 26 letters in our alphabet and that those 26 letters make 44 different sounds, and knowing which letters make which sounds are part of phonemic awareness. The student that I was speaking of now, the one who's coming from Tanzania, He's actually working with the tutor on letter recognition, because before you can learn what sounds go with the letters, you have to know which letter is which, uppercase and lowercase. So he has to learn the 52 letters of our alphabet first, meaning the 26 upper and the 26 lowercase. He needs to be able to recognize those when he sees them automatically. And then he'll go to building his phonemic awareness, which is learning which letters go with which sounds. So phonemic awareness is what helps us know that the B makes the B sound, or that the D makes the D sound, or that C is K or S, right? So when we're doing work with students who lack phonemic awareness, we're teaching them what the letters look like, the sounds they make, and how those sounds are articulated. So if you see the graphic on the right side of your screen, we use our lips, we use our teeth, we use the tip of our tongue, the roof of our mouth, we use the back of our throat, we use our alveolar ridge, we use all of those things. Those are all called articulators. And those are the things that we use to produce the sounds of our language. So when a student is working on phonemic awareness, they're learning to hear the difference between sounds, and they're learning to produce those sounds with their own mouths. And so a lot of that work is done with you showing them something and then having them look in the mirror and see what it is that they're producing. So if they're giving you a D sound instead of a T sound, it's you helping them figure out how to make the distinction when they hear it and how to make the distinction in producing it. Why is that important? Because if a student wants to learn how to spell the word wanted, right, they need to be able to hear that that's a T in the middle of wanted and a D at the end of wanted. Okay, so developing phonemic awareness is the very first part. It's the most foundational part of reading. And a lot of students may have reading skills, but still have some phonemic awareness that they're lacking. And so that may be a student who doesn't understand that G makes two sounds. And so when they're trying to sound out a G word, they don't really know where to go with it. So phonemic awareness, foundational part of reading. That's part one. Once a student has phonemic awareness skills, then they have the skills to begin learning phonics. Phonics is all of the rules that help us learn how to combine the phonemes in our language to make words. So it's the order of operations of reading, if you will, right? So the order of operations in math is the rules for how math works, the order that we have to do things. And phonics is the rules for language. So phonics tells you that the T, if you put the T and the two O's together, those two O's together can be or it can be oo, right? And so phonics helps students to string all of those sounds together so they can see the T-O-O-T-H and sound out that word is tooth, right? So we work with students on our phonics, and some of the phonics skills, one that stands out to me really, really clearly is I had a student who was a very proficient reader. She read at about a 9th grade level, even though her school had told her she read at a 2nd grade level. She was able to read a 9th grade passage with reading the amount of words per minute that I would expect from a 9th grader. She didn't stumble over words. She knew how to sound a lot of words out. But she did not know that when she saw a D-G-E together, she didn't know what it was. So she would say, Fritgate, Frit. And I would say, anytime you see that D-G-E, that's called a trigraph. Whenever you see that D-G-E, it's always going to make the J sound. And so then she saw the next word and she said, fudge? There's that trigraph, right? Yes, there's that trigraph. So phonics is learning the rules of how we combine sounds together. It's how we know that O-U-G-H can be cough or bow or the oo and through, right? So phonics is learning those rules and the many exceptions that exist in English, so the students can learn to decode the English language, meaning they can see a word that they may not recognize in their visual vocabulary, and they can tear those words apart, break them down, know how to pronounce them, and know how to then hear it. So sometimes you'll be working with a student and they'll be trying to sound out a word, and when as they're trying to sound it out, they'll actually hear what they're saying. And then when they hear what they're saying, they go, oh, I do know that word. Because what happens is we have words that are in our oral vocabulary, words that we've heard that are not necessarily in our visual vocabulary. So we've been hearing language since we came out of the womb, right? So there are lots of words that we've heard that we've never seen written. So you've all had the experience of writing down a word and then looking at it and going, is that right? 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 Because you have heard that word, you've spoken that word, it's in your hearing and speaking vocabulary, but it may not necessarily be in your visual and written vocabulary. Another great example of this, just scroll down your Facebook timeline. You're going to see people who are using words that they've heard, words that they've used, but words that they've never seen written. I feel like so very, very recently I saw someone's Facebook post where a person was talking about, I think she was saying that voting for Trump was like playing Russian roulette, right? So Russian roulette is Russian, R-U-S-S-I-A-N, like the country, and then roulette, like the game. So this person wrote Rush, R-U-S-H, and roulette. Why would she write Rush and roulette? Because she has heard that before, because she has said it before, but she's not seen it written for it to be in her writing and thinking and visual vocabulary. Okay, are you all still with me? You're all very, very quiet. I don't see any activity in the chat and I don't see anybody's faces. So I don't know if you guys are following me or not. Can I get a thumbs up from somebody if you're still here? Still following? This makes sense. Okay, alrighty, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Ellie. Okay, so that's phonics. So phonemic awareness is knowing the letters and the sounds. Phonics is knowing how to combine them all together. All right, so the best example that I use with my students for phonics, this is kind of how I explain to them, this is why you are struggling with English, right? So if you look at this picture, and you obviously it's a picture of a fish, but you see the word, I don't know, you probably would guess goatee in front of it, right? But if you really look at the English language, that doesn't spell goatee at all. In fact, it spells fish. So if you take the GH from the word laugh, you take the O from women, which makes, and actually it makes a short I sound and not a short O sound. And then you take the TI from lotion, which makes the sh sound. That goatee actually spells fish. So I use this with the students so that they can see that, oh yeah, you know, that don't make sense, but it kind of do make sense, Miss Carmen. That's kind of what, right? So that's the reason that is so important, because our language is so crazy because it's such a mix of many, many different languages. Now, you might have seen this on social media. People will post it on my page and they'll kind of laugh like, ha, 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 you know, right? Because the words are misspelled. However, if you look at the images that are on your screen right now, you probably can make out everything that was on this person's grocery list, right? What this person is doing is called invented spelling. You don't hear that a lot in adult literacy, but in elementary schools, when they're encouraging kids to write, they encourage them to use invented spelling. So what they're doing though is relying a lot on their phonics knowledge. They're relying a lot on those phonics cues, right? On what they're hearing. And actually the way that they're spelling things makes a lot more sense. You know, so lettuce to me makes a lot more sense. L-E-T-U-S, sorry. L-E-T-U-S makes a lot more sense to me for lettuce than L-E-T-T-U-C-E, right? We just have been conditioned to recognizing that word. So people will put this up as though it's kind of a joke and, oh, this person is really stupid. And I would say this person is actually doing a really good job of communicating because I understand everything that they want me to understand. And I could go to the store with that list and pull everything that they wanted from the grocery store shelves, right? So phonics is what helps us know when the M-E-E-T is to get together versus when M-E-A-T means something that we might eat or avoid eating, right? So that's phonics in a nutshell. Fluency is the third component of reading, and fluency is critically important to comprehension. So if a student is reading fluently, it means that they're reading at the speed of conversational language. It means that they're reading with accuracy, and it means that they're reading with expression. And the reason that fluency is important, not necessarily because we want students to read fast always in their everyday lives, but because when a student doesn't have any speed, when they struggle with accuracy and they don't have comprehension, that tells us that they don't understand what they're reading, okay? So if a student reads, the fox ate the chicken on Tuesday, it rained. If there's no boundaries between sentences, so they don't pay any attention to punctuation, when they're reading words, it sounds like they're reading a list instead of reading sentences. That is a student who is not a fluent reader. They don't have speed. They may not be accurate, meaning that they may miss a lot of words, and their reading is very flat and monotone. There's no expression. What you know when you hear a student read like that is that that student has no possible way of comprehending what they're reading, okay? So what happens when we read, when you and I read, we take in so much more of the passage. So if I put a sentence on the screen now with a question mark and ask one of you to read it out loud, before you even see that question mark at the end, your voice would go up as though you're asking a question, because you've been conditioned to take in all of that information as you're reading. Someone who's not fluent isn't taking in all of that information. They're very, very focused on each word at a time. And because they're focusing on each word at a time, their working memory, which is the memory that holds information until we need it, their working memory is so busy focusing on the individual words that there's no working memory left to actually comprehend what it is that they're reading. So for example, if I said to Elliot Huff, because he's right here in front of me. So if I said, Elliot, can you go dial this number, 924-4677? He would hold on to that 924-4677 until he got this phone. He would punch in the 924-4677 and he would make the phone call. If I said 5 minutes from now, what was that phone number again? He probably would be like, I have no idea what it is. I dialed it. I mean, you want me to redial it? But he wouldn't necessarily hold on to it. That's working memory. We also use working memory. If you're in the store and you're buying a couple things and you're trying to estimate how much it's going to cost based on how much cash in your pocket, you're using your working memory to hold on to that. So when students are using all of their working memory to focus on each individual word, they don't have any working memory left to actually understand the passage. So if you have a student who reads that way, it is actually inappropriate to give them comprehension tasks, okay? So in terms of accuracy, if a student can read a passage, so let's say you give them a passage with 100 words. If they miss 10 of those words, that's a description of their accuracy. So 90 words divided by 100 words is 90% accuracy, okay? So if a student reads, and you can do that with any number. So if a student reads 256 words, you take the number of words they've read, divided by the total number of words in that passage, and you get their accuracy percentage, okay? If a student is reading a passage at 98 to 100% accuracy, that means that that student is able to read that at their own individual level, their individual reading level. They can read that passage on their own, they're not gonna get frustrated, and they'll persist, okay? If a student's accuracy is somewhere between 92 to 98%, they're reading at that instructional level. If a reading is at a student's instructional level, it means that if they're working with the teacher, or if they're working with the tutor on that passage, or if they're working with a more proficient reader on that passage, they can work through that passage. It's within their zone of proximal development. They can learn from that while they have someone with them, but it's not necessarily a passage you want to give a student to work with on their own. If a passage is below that 91%, that's considered to be at a student's frustration level. So if you give a student that passage, whether they're working with a teacher or not, if you give a passage where they can't read it with 91% accuracy, with at least 92% accuracy, then you're working at that student's frustration level. And these are the students who you meet who say, oh, I hate reading, or who they're very resistant to trying it. They're resistant to trying it because what they're trying to read is so far beyond their level that they're just really frustrated with it. So at Seeds, one of the things we do is try to figure out where that student's level is, so that we're giving them reading passages that will challenge them, but not make them so frustrated that they quit the program. Okay, so then expression is another thing. So if we have one reading assessment that we use, talks about the Chicago fire. And in the story about the Chicago fire, talks about the fact that this pig was accused of a cow was accused of starting the fire, and the council exonerated the cow, okay? Or like 10 years later, the council exonerated the cow. If a student reads that and they don't have a reaction, that tells me a lot about their comprehension. If they don't have any, you'll hear that Mrs. O'Leary's cow was exonerated. Like if their expression tells me that they understand that tells me a lot about the appropriateness of that passage and about that student's comprehension. If a student says Mrs. O'Leary's cow was exonerated, then I know that they don't know what that means. If I'm listening to a student and they're reading the passage and they say, my kids were excited to go on the roller coaster, but I was afraid. If I hear that in their expression, I can tell if they comprehend what they're reading or not. So fluency is speed, accuracy, and expression. Vocabulary is also critically important. General vocabulary is important. And I think a lot of times we kind of take the general vocabulary for granted because we're working with adult learners. But what's true is the words that we think of, like we think of infer, or we think of analyze, and we think of synthesize, and we assume that our students know what that means, but we can't take that for granted. So it's easier to ask a student if they understand what something means than it is to assume that they have the knowledge when they don't, and then find out 2 months later that they weren't making inferences well, not because they don't know how to make inferences, but because they didn't understand what the word infer meant, okay? So we have to do work to help develop their general vocabulary. We have to do work to help develop their content-specific vocabulary. And I should also add that in addition to developing students' vocabulary, building student background knowledge is as much a part of building their reading comprehension as anything else. Because when we read, reading is a very constructive process. So when you read something, you're actually making connections between what's on the page and things that you already know, right? So if I gave you a passage about differential statistics right now, reading that page, you'd be like, God, I don't understand anything. You're not struggling to understand it because you don't have intelligence. You're struggling to understand it because you don't have background knowledge about differential statistics, and maybe you don't have foundational knowledge about statistics at all, and that's not in your purview. However, if I gave you a passage about adult literacy instruction, it would be very easy for you because you already have that background knowledge, okay? So it's the same with our students. If they don't have specific background knowledge about the things that they're reading, they don't have anything to build upon. So a lot of the work in helping students become stronger readers is in developing that background knowledge, that content knowledge. And so, I mean, I use all kinds of things with working with students, particularly beginning readers. If I'm working with a beginning reader and we're reading word list, I've got a slideshow with pictures in it, or I've got Google Images open so that they can see what they're working on. I was working with a student when I was at, what is the name of the program? I can't think of it. Oh, when I was at May Dugan's Educational Center. They had a student who was like, he was fluent in English and he was fluent in Spanish, but he couldn't read in either language. And so we were working on reading, and he had gotten to the point where he was able to decode 8-letter words. And so he decoded jumpstart. And it was like, oh, great, that's a 9-letter word. You're doing great. What is a jumpstart? And he was like, I'm sorry, it was jump shot. And he's like, I don't know. And I said, jump shot, do you hear what you're saying? Yes. Do you hear what I'm saying? Yes. What are we saying? Jump shot. What is a jump shot? I don't know. As soon as I put it in Google and the basketball came up, he goes, oh, jump shot, right? So because a student sees a word on paper, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily making a connection to that concept. So focusing on building background knowledge and general vocabulary is really important. Then there's the content-specific vocabulary, and that is math-related vocabulary. That is science, social studies vocabulary. It's even vocabulary related to reading, like understanding the plot, or understanding the setting, or understanding the tone. So that content-specific vocabulary is very important. When we were talking about reading accuracy, one of the things that I do with students, if I'm working with a student on a reading passage, one of the first things I'll do is ask them, don't even read through the passage. Just look through the lines. Start at the bottom and go up and circle, underline, or highlight any word that you don't already know. Because if a student doesn't understand 10% of the words already, they're at that frustration level for their reading passage. So instead of having them start off with that frustration, let's just start off by defining what these words are, and so that you understand what they mean, so that there isn't, so that you're not struggling to comprehend the passage because you don't understand, oh, I'm so sorry, because you don't understand most of the vocabulary. So one of the first things that I do is get students to, let's talk about this vocabulary, and let's talk about what this means, and let's put this vocabulary in your own words, and maybe even substitute the vocabulary. Like maybe we have a synonym that we can substitute in the passage so that you really understand what it is that you're saying. And so once they understand the vocabulary, then we focus on the reading, because if they don't understand at the individual word level, there's no way they're going to understand at the paragraph or passage level. So focusing on that, and then also focusing on the skills that help them use words, how to use context clues, or how to use different devices that authors may use. So if an author says the general, or the captain in charge of the troops, comma, then we know, like if we teach students that those are clues to what general means, then we're helping to build their vocabulary skills as well. Vocabulary is critically important to comprehension. There's no way a student's going to understand a passage if they don't have the skills to figure out vocabulary words, or if they don't have the tools to figure out vocabulary words. If there are 10 words, every 10 words they're struggling with, they're not going to understand the passage completely. They may be able to kind of string together some ideas from that passage and tell you what it's about, but they don't really have full comprehension. So it's important to get that. So here's a quick passage I just want you all to read for me. You're going to need to use your phonics skills to decode it. You're going to need to use your fluency skills to read it accurately and with expression. And then I'm going to ask you to tell me what this passage is about. All right, so if you can just put in the comments, what do you think this passage is about? What is a quig? Or you can say no idea. That way I know that you guys haven't all dozed off on me and that you're still paying attention. So, what is a quig? All righty, so let's talk about this passage. I'm assuming that everyone, thanks Amy. All right, very good. Regina Johnson, that was excellent. So everyone, we use this in our tutor training, and we use it in our tutor training, and what we do is we give the tutors a passage and then we ask them to answer a question about the passage. And the question is, what is the STIP's job, okay? So in my presentation, let's see, on the fourth sentence is the STIP's job is to smat the cots. And that's what we ask our tutors. What is the STIP's job? The STIP's job is to smat the cots. And every single tutor, almost without fail, will say, well, the STIP's job is to smat the cots. And I'll say, well, what is a STIP? And they'll go, I have no idea, right? So but they get the right answer, right? And so one of the things I explain to them is, you can read through this entire passage without struggling over the words. And you can sound out all the words, you can read it quickly, right? You got that speed, you got that accuracy, you might even read it with expression, even though you don't understand what you're saying. You can do all of those things. You can go to the question and you can answer the question and not know anything about the passage. And guess what? Our students do that every single day if you let them. Because they've struggled, because they've had to find because printed word isn't as accessible to them as it is to us, they found other methods for figuring things out. And so one of those methods is learning how to take a test. And one of the biggest test taking skills is to look for the keywords in the question text and then go back to your passage and look for the keywords in the passage and then come up with the right answer, right? Well, how much is it going to benefit a student to get 100 right answers in your program if they don't understand anything that they're reading? It's not going to help them at all, because the jobs that they're seeking, the careers that they're seeking, they're not going to be able to just go to the question text and then find the keyword and then go to the past. That's not how life works. So if your students are getting by using that strategy instead of by actually understanding what it is that they're reading, we're all doing them a disservice. Okay, so I'm going to show you how much easier this passage is to understand. So I see Sarah and Regina Johnson both guessed bees. So reread the passage now and substitute the word bee for quig and finny for the word honey. And see how much clearer this passage is when you just have two new words that are not unfamiliar to you. Okay, so even if you don't remember the stips, followers, and cots, or the stips, followers, and terts, you can understand more about this passage because the words honey and bee were accessible to you. So just look at how much easier it is to understand the passage when you just had two extra words, two extra clues to help you understand it, okay? So beyond that, you have some background knowledge of how honeybees work. And you may not know what the things are called or any of that. However, knowing that, using your background knowledge, you can actually make up for the fact that you don't understand some of the vocabulary words. So this is to underscore the fact that vocabulary is critically important to comprehension, and that background knowledge provides so much support even when you don't have all of the vocabulary, okay? So if you're not focusing on vocabulary with all of your students, you are doing them a disservice. Then comprehension is the last step. And the thing about comprehension is it isn't enough for a student to just read a passage and be able to answer a couple questions. Comprehension is actually understanding something well enough to then be able to act on it, right? So gosh, I'm thinking of one particular person right now. I'm not going to use her as an example because that'll take me down a politics road and I don't want to go there. So anyway, with comprehension, if you understand what it is what you're reading and you're able to make sense out of what it is that you're reading, and then you're able to use that information to make decisions or to make choices, that is real comprehension. It isn't comprehension to take home the discharge papers from your kid's pediatrician and to say, okay, well, these are the directions that they gave me, and I'm not sure, am I supposed to give her, does it say I'm supposed to give her 2 doses, or I'm not supposed to give her 2 doses, or does it say I can give it to her with grapefruit, or she's not supposed to have grapefruit? That comprehension is about knowing what to do, understanding well enough to know what to do and what not to do, right? So if my kid's medication is not supposed to be taken with grapefruit, and maybe the form says that it's contraindicated, my students wouldn't know what that is without some help and support. So comprehension is being able to get the correct information from a passage and being able to use that information to make good decisions, to draw conclusions, to answer questions, okay? What do our materials support in adult literacy? Out of those 5 components of reading, phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, what do our materials support? Okay, so I'm just gonna say for me, my first teaching assignment in adult literacy, and some of you will probably find this very, very familiar, but my first teaching assignment in adult literacy, I found out on Friday afternoon that I was gonna be teaching this classroom full of students on Monday morning, and I had no access to the classroom. I had no access to any assessment scores. I had no access to the curriculum. I went to Borders bookstore and I lived in that book for the whole entire weekend so I could be prepared with something on Monday, because I had no idea who the students were that I was going to be facing, what they knew and what they didn't know. And I just wanted to feel like I knew a little bit more than they did so that they would believe me, find me credible as an instructor, okay? So in that book, which I actually really liked because it did give me a lot of information to help my students. But in that book, almost every single lesson focused on comprehension with maybe a smattering of vocabulary tossed in there. So if I shared with you that 77% of the students who came into SEEDS in the last fiscal year, 77% of our students were reading below an 8th grade reading level. Okay, so if we focused only on comprehension, how many of those students do you think would have been, thank you, Salome, for your answers. How many of you think my students would have struggled? How many of you think that my students below that 77%, how many of them do you think might have benefited from having some vocabulary instruction, some help on fluency, some help on building their phonics skills? Probably a lot, right? So I'm going to use this analogy from medicine that might be kind of relevant, especially now with COVID, right? So let's say you go to the doctor and you see the doctor and you say, you know, I got a sore throat and a fever and chills and I just don't feel well. And the doctor said, you know what, here's a thermometer. Oh my gosh, yes, you have a fever. Go home and come back to me tomorrow. So you go home, you sleep, you put some Vicks on your chest, you do all the things that you know to do to make yourself feel better, and you still feel like garbage the next day. And you go back to the doctor and the doctor says, here, stick this thermometer under your tongue and let me see. And oh my God, you still have a fever, and sent you home. And you went back home and you suffered through another night and you feel like garbage the next day. Would you go back to the doctor the next day, given that the only thing he's done in the last 2 days is check your temperature? Probably not. I know that I wouldn't, right? But that's what we do a lot of times in adult education is we give students a reading packet or science or social studies. They read it, they answer questions, we give them their score, and we give them another packet, right? So what we're doing is we're measuring where they are, but we're not doing a lot of intervention in that. And so they're coming back to us the same day after day after day, and they're frustrated and we're frustrated. Something has to happen from one assessment to the next assessment for something to change, in the same way that something has to happen between office visits for your health to improve, right? So we have to focus on that intervention piece. So this is the process that we follow at Seeds now. Obviously, all of our students come in, they all have to take the TABE test. Any student, and actually this has changed a little bit. So if they come in at the 9th grade level or above, it used to be 7.9 and 8, but of course the folks at DRC don't give us those little finer details anymore. So you're either an 8 or a 9. So if a student comes in at a 9th grade or above, they focus on their high school equivalency literacy skills. So they're focusing on the sections of the test. But then they also do some digital literacy work and some workforce development work because we're trying to help them transition to wherever they're going next. So that's the first thing that they focus on. If they come in at the 8th grade level or below, then they focus on their literacy so they can still do math, science, social studies, you know, whatever. However, they're going to be focusing on reading intervention. So the first thing we do is we assess students' fluency, and the fluency gives us some idea of where they are, if they're like reading, you know, if they're reading fast enough for their grade level. And I think the one thing that is important to consider with speed is that since their tests are timed tests, the TABE is timed, the GED is timed, the HiSET is timed. Since their tests are timed, if they read very slowly, they could have all the knowledge that they need to pass the test, but if they can't finish the test within the allotted time, it doesn't matter how much knowledge they have. So speed is a factor with that fluency in terms of making sure students accomplish their goals. So focusing on fluency, excuse me, that focus on fluency also helps us to identify when a student is struggling with phonics. And so then we do a phonics assessment that we use with them. And if that phonics assessment, a lot of times when we're doing that phonics assessment, one of the things we'll find out is that students don't really have those phonemic awareness skills. So then we know that we need to go back to making sure they understand letters and letter sounds. That is our process. And actually during the pandemic, we haven't split them by grade level because the TABE isn't our first step. Now, normally, obviously, students go through orientation. The TABE test is part of orientation. With the pandemic, we've been doing like our own assessments, and then the TABE assessment comes a little bit later because we were all off-site. So we've been doing fluency assessments of all of our students. And can I tell you, I have students who are reading at a 12th grade level, but still don't know what to do when they get to a word that they don't recognize. Most of our students have so many words in their visual vocabulary that they don't necessarily always know that they can't read. So I had a student come to me she was actually from a colleague from another program, and because she was just struggling with her reading. And so she came in and she sat down next to me and she says, well, you know, I mean, I can read. And she looked at the wall and we had the Pledge of Allegiance written on the wall. And she said, I mean, I can read that. And I said, okay, go ahead. And so she read it. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. I mean, it was beautiful. She did a great job. And I said, that's great. Can you read this word for me? And I wrote the word allegiance on my paper. And she looked at it and she turned her head and she turned it back this way. And she goes, all American? Because she has so many words that she knows and remembers. She has the Pledge of Allegiance committed to memory. So she doesn't necessarily understand that she's not reading, because there are times when she is reading and does understand, but it's just not consistent. So it's those assessments allow us to really kind of drill down and figure out what a student is struggling with. And so we go back and figure out what is the real issue with their reading. For us, we use what's called an AIM approach. This was something from my dissertation. That is to assess what a student is seriously struggling with, to provide intervention in line with that assessment, and then to monitor the student's progress. If you're not aiming, if you're not doing that assessment intervention, then you know what's really guiding your instruction. So we focus on really putting fluency first with our students, making sure that they're able to read fluently, because if they can't read fluently, then comprehension isn't necessarily going to be accessible for them. Like I said, we do have students who are very, very proficient readers. They read pretty good at a 12th grade level, but they still have things that they need to learn to do. So most likely after the pandemic, we'll continue to do fluency assessments of all of our students, because it's helping us pinpoint the things that they're struggling with. And they'll tell you, yeah, Ms. Carmen, I don't know what to do when I get to those big words. Like some of them I know, but some of them I don't know. And so we teach them how to approach those. We give them those word attack skills. Defining vocabulary, again, is very, very important. Checking for understanding. So one thing that sometimes students will do is they'll read a whole entire passage, and then you'll get to the bottom of that passage and say, okay, so what's the passage about? And they'll be like, oh, Ms. Carmen, I don't have any idea. Because, so what I will teach students is check your understanding all throughout. Don't wait until you get to the end of the passage. And I do that. If I were to grab one of my books from my office and hold it up for you, you see there are notes in every single margin, because I'll read a paragraph and then I'll write like a 3-word summary next to that paragraph. Why? Not because I don't think I'll remember it at the end of the passage, but number one, I use my textbooks over and over for different classes that I teach. So I don't have to reread the whole entire book, but those little margin 3-4 word summaries in the margins help me go back and remember what the whole entire thing was about. So it takes me a while to read the book, but to reread the book takes me like within an hour, 2 hours, because I just read my margin notes. And if I really want to dig deeper, then I'll go back to a paragraph. So that's one of the strategies that we can teach our students, is to check for your understanding, not when you get to the end of a passage, but at the end of a couple of sentences, at the end of a paragraph, and really like learn how to labor through. So our students think that we open everything and comprehend it right away. They don't necessarily know that we do things like use annotation. They don't necessarily know that we highlight. They don't necessarily know that we might write a definition, look up a word and write the definition in the margin. They may not know that we reread something when we don't understand it. They don't know that we're checking for understanding. So you and I may read something and read a paragraph and be like, I don't know what that is, and then go back. And maybe we'll Google something to help give us some better background knowledge and come back to it. All of those strategies are strategies that our students need to learn to use, because depending on where they separated from school, they may not have gotten to the point where someone taught them how to do those things. So helping them learn to check for understanding. And using visual tools. When we do our reading assessments, almost all of them have titles, and the students will always say, well, Ms. Carmen, do I need to read the title? Please read the title. The title might give you some information about what it is that you're reading, right? If I'm in a bookstore, I'm flipping through the headings. I'm looking at the pictures in the margins of a book before if I'm looking at 2 different books, I'm looking at all of those visual tools to see which ones are going to be more supportive of me as a reader. I'm less likely to buy a book that's straight text, just because those visual tools really do help your understanding, whether it's vocabulary words in the margins. We've got some students right now who are helping us develop a health literacy curriculum. And one of the first things that I told them is like, yeah, I need visual tools to kind of help the students, whether that's images from a place where you can get those free images online that are either out for public consumption, that are free, that are beyond their copyright. So we'll use visual tools, whether that's images, whether it's graphs, whether it's drawings, whether they're graphic organizers, using visual tools to help students connect their comprehension. Making learning a moving experience. So sometimes I will try to use a student's own experiences to help them understand something. So say, for example, we're talking about the checks and balances in the three branches of government. I'll ask them questions about things like, well, what happens if, if you ask your mom for something, you ask your dad for something, you ask your grandmother for something, or you ask the 3 authority figures in your life for something, 2 of them may say yes and one of them will say no, right? And so you can't necessarily do it because you have no from grandma, even if mom and dad said yes, right? So I try to use things that are in their own lives and try to use that. And then also not being afraid to use like actual physical activities and movement to help them understand the concept that they're trying to understand, and literally using movement as a way to help facilitate learning. And then using text structure. So using the headings and then using subheadings. When I was in college, the first time I bought my textbooks, I was in shock. And because I didn't know that they would be so expensive, but I found out that if I read my textbooks and turned them back in, I could get 100% of my money back if I could do it within the first 3 weeks. So the first 3 weeks of class, I outlined my books. I looked at the headings, I looked at the subheadings, and I used those to outline. And then as I read, I write little notes, and then I turned my books and I got my money back. But what that did for me more than anything is that when I was sitting in class, the professors were telling me things that I'd already read about. So they were just verifying and confirming what I knew. And if I had questions, things that didn't match what they said with what I remembered, I would ask questions. And my friends would be like, how did you know to ask that question? Because I'd already read the book, not because I'm intelligent, but because I'm cheap. So that worked for me. The last thing is the KWL. And I like the KWL if you've never used it before. It's a graphic organizer, but it's just a tool. You don't need any fancy format for it. You can just write 3 columns on a piece of paper. K stands for what you know. W stands for what you want to know. L stands for what you learned. I love using this with adult learners because adult learners, sometimes they will surprise you with how much background knowledge they actually have on a topic. So I asked them, what do you know about this topic? So let's say, for example, we were studying about to read about the Civil War. I would ask, what do you already know about the Civil War? And everything that they think they know, I would write it down. Now, sometimes what they know may not actually be accurate. Well, I mean, I knew it was about, I don't know, what was it like, the North versus the South? Okay, yep, let's put that in there. Wasn't it something about how Abraham Lincoln wanted another term to be president? I don't know. Let's write that down. That's something that you think you know. What do they think they already know about the topic? And it's okay if what they think they know isn't accurate, because once they start reading it, they will be able to check that. Oh, that wasn't right, Miss Carmen. I didn't get that right. That's okay. So the K column is writing down what they already know. The W is what do you want to know about it? What are you interested in learning about this topic? And in the beginning, students are a little bit reluctant to put things in the W column. But if they say, well, was it about, like, if they did have something, wasn't it about Abraham Lincoln and another time? I was like, was it about that? Or do you think it might have been, I don't know, maybe that's a good question. What was the cause of the war? So then we make a column for what are the things that we want to know. Now, why would we even do this? When students are reading, if they have questions already, then they have a purpose for their reading, and they're a lot more likely to retain what it is that they're reading. They're a lot more likely to find it. So when we ask, when they're reading for a purpose, they're more focused on pulling out that purpose. In the same way that if you're on a web page and you're not looking for anything in particular, you may not take a lot in. But if you're specifically looking for the symptoms of COVID, your focus is going to be very different. And it works the same with the students. The L column is for what they learn. So as they learn something, they write down what they learned. And some of what they're learning is the answers to the questions to what you want to know. And they're able to verify what was in the no column. So if what they read isn't the same as what is in the no column, maybe you go to another source to see if that source says the same thing, or maybe you just correct it. But I like using the know, what do you want to know, and what have you learned organizer, because it makes students focus and gives them a purpose and a focus for what they're reading. And they're more likely to attend to things that are important if you use that. So I want to show you a tool that we use at Seeds really quickly. And I like it because it is, it's free, first of all. It's free, it's available online. So if you're a tutor or a student, if you're a tutor or a teacher and you're working with a student and they have internet access, then you can explore ReadWorks together and you don't have to worry about copyright or any of that other stuff. Everything is online. And so the way that ReadWorks works is you set up an account. There's a student login and there's an administrator login. We have one administrator account for Seeds of Literacy. And so then you create student logins. So with the administrator login, what it does is it allows you to set up classes. So the way we set up our classes is our classes are set up based on NRS levels. So we have ABE 1, AB through ABE 4, and then we have ASC 1 and 2. And so what we're able to do is pull readings from each passage. I'm going to actually walk you through this first, and then if we have time, I'll actually go to the website. But what it does is it brings up graded passages or leveled passages, and you can pick fiction or nonfiction. You can do reading, writing, math, science, social studies, and you pull them by grade level. They'll tell you the word counts, the number of words in the passage. So if you want to calculate accuracy percentages, it's easy to do that. You just count how many words your student was able to read in a certain amount of time, or how many words they were able to read accurately. You can subtract the number of errors from the total number of words, divide the words that they read correctly by the total number of words, and that gives you the student's accuracy percentage, okay? So you can use it for phonics, like you may look at specific, I remember with this one lesson, we had a student who couldn't understand that QUE is that eek sound. So I told him, we wrote on a piece of paper that IQUE usually makes a sound eek. And I was like, what words do you know of that have eek in it? And I was like unique. And they were like, Monique, my niece's name is Monique. Yep, Monique, what else? Dominique. And then they just started throwing out words that might have antique, unique, whatever. And so what they start learning is that is the phonics rule that they can apply to every word with that IQUE ending. Okay, and so you can use it to kind of pull out some phonics lessons. The SC and scent, helping them understand that when they see that SC together, if that SC is followed by an E or an I, it's usually going to be a S sound, but if that SC is followed by an A, an O, or a U, it's usually going to be a sk sound, right? So you can use that to create, you can use the ReadWorks tools to create a phonics lesson. You can obviously use it for vocabulary. They actually tell you how many words are in the passage. They tell you if it's fiction or nonfiction. They give you the Lexile levels. They give you a grade level. They do have curriculum supports built into it. And this is just the formula I described before. The total words in the passage minus the unfamiliar words is the words that the students can read. And if you divide the words that students can read by the total words, you know whether they can read that accurately. You know their percentage that they can understand. Another thing that I like, so again, using vocabulary, remembering that if it's at that 92 or above level, then that's at the student's independent level. If it's 92, I say 92 to 95, it's in the instructional level. Anything below 90 is at the frustration level. Okay. And then another thing that I like about ReadWorks is that they print beautifully. So you have these reading passages, and I don't know if you can see this very well, but at the top, like above the picture of the orchids, there's a little play button. These passages have audio with them. Now, some of them are all a person reading. Some of them are computer generated. If a student's really bothered by computer generated, you can actually choose only the ones that are read by humans. But what happens is if a student is listening to this passage, they can read the passage for themselves, and then they can listen to someone reading the passage. And that's a way for a student to develop their fluency, that repeated oral reading with a model of fluent reading. So we can use that to build the student's fluency, but also for comprehension, because the questions have sets along with them. So you'll have the questions, and then you'll have the passage, and then there'll be comprehension questions that the students can ask. But then you can also do things like check for comprehension and ask a student after they've read 2 or 3 sentences what they know is happening or what they understand. Okay. Another thing I like about ReadWorks is that this is what it looks like if someone's reading it on like an Apple, if they have an iPhone, if they're looking at an iPad. It looks very pretty no matter what they're using. This is what it looks like on an Android. So it's very easy for them to navigate to, and all they have to do is click on the student login. The way ours is set up, students log in, there's a code word for each level. So I don't want someone who's in ABE1 reading an ASC2 passage. So there's a code word for each login or for each level. And then they all use the same password, which is just 1, 2, 3, 4, because you know what it's like to have to reset passwords or help them find passwords. So we use 1, 2, 3, 4 as a default for every student. And then this is what it looks like when it prints. It prints exactly like it looks in the actual system. It's very neat, it's very clean, it's very beautiful. And so if you have students who, like at the very beginning of the pandemic, we actually mailed some of these passages to some of our students so they could have a passage that their tutors were reading along with. And they were able to build in all of those lessons to them. So some alternatives to ReadWorks are CommonLit. Is very similar to ReadWorks. News ELA is articles that are relevant to student news. And I think that sometimes students may be more interested in these topics. One thing I will caution you with is if you're doing the low level, that 0 to 3 beginning readers, I wouldn't use the fiction passages, because they're a little bit, the language of them, like the protagonists are all like little kids. So it sounds like a child, and I don't like to use those with our learners. So with the 0 to 3, we only use nonfiction stories. And then there's a program called Read Theory, which gives the students an assessment, and then it assigns passages based on that assessment, and then it has comprehension questions. I don't use Read Theory because I feel like ReadWorks gives me a little bit more control over what our students are doing, and because we're already assessing them to death, I don't need to assess them in that as well. So I wanted to give everyone a moment to ask questions, but I want to show you what ReadWorks looks like in real time too. So if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat. And if you need to go, feel free, but I want to at least show you what ReadWorks looks like, okay? So here you have, if I just go to their website, the students can log in from that page. And as an instructor, I would log in here. So I'm going to log in, I'm going to put in my C's email. And my password. Oh, what did I do? Oh, I didn't put a C in literacy. There we go. Okay. All right. So when I come into, now they do ask for donations, but other than that, it's free. So if I go to class administration, you'll see that we have passages for each level. We actually have one that we're building for our phonics students who are new. If I look at the ABE1 level, it'll show me all the students who are enrolled in that level. Okay. Now there isn't a whole lot of back-end user data in this, but I do like, you know, what it is. So if I go to current assignments, I can see all the readings that have been assigned to the students in this level. Okay, the 0 out of 17 submitted is for the actual question assignments. We don't require students to do that. We use them more for building fluency and comprehension. We do have some students who insist on doing them. So for some of the levels, you can actually see the student progress, but then I can open a passage and the passage will show me, oops, I'm sorry, go to the passage. So the passage has, I can play it so the students hear the audio. There are other tools, there are question sets. So here are questions that the student can answer, okay? There are vocabulary pages, so the vocabulary lesson is already there and ready for you. If you're looking for a free phonics lesson, Diane, I don't know of a free phonics lesson, but is it called phonics? I want to say it's called Phonics to Go is the one that I typically, you know what, Diane, I'm going to email you. I'm going to get your address from your registration and then I'll email you. Because I don't think the right name of it isn't coming to me, but I can recommend one that I think of, okay? So again, it shows you the lexile, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, it relates to the Common Core state standards. It also has other passages that are related to it. You can group passages by themes. You can focus on themes. If I want to find content for my students, I can select the article a day passages. I can select challenges, collections for English language learners. I can do paired text. Paired text means it'll give me 2 articles that are around kind of the same topic, which prepare students for like the GED, where it's like, oh, thanks, Diane, where you can see that. So in the GED test, they have to read one passage and read another and then analyze and synthesize and decide what's the better argument. So the paired text gives you a chance to kind of give the students practice of reading 2 passages on the same topic and then comparing and contrasting. You can select just human voice audio if you don't want that, and it'll only pull up the passages that have human voice. You can choose your question set. Do you want open-ended questions? Do you want to monitor it? Do you want vocabulary? You can choose your grade levels. You can choose the topic if each one of those can break down even further. So US history versus world history, etc. Then they have a special collection for social emotional learning, holidays and events, etc. You can choose whether you want fiction, nonfiction, or poetry. And then you can actually choose your lexile range as well. So if I only want lexile readings between here, it'll narrow them down for me. So it's a really good tool, I think, to use for every component of your reading program except for phonemic awareness. And that's because the phonemic awareness stuff really kind of has to be done in isolation because the students don't have, their skills aren't as advanced to use many of the other topics. Okay. Any other questions?
Yes. I'm sorry. My name is Demetria Korn, and I've been trying to put stuff in the chat, and every time I do, it would cut me off. So I would have to come back in and someone had to let me in. I also would write in another part of the chat, but I don't think you all can see it. I did a question in the question and answer in regards to one of my students. When she reads, she writes the whole passage down. And she says that's the only way that she can comprehend and answer the question. And I said, well, we have to figure out something, because when you take the GED test, because it's time, she can't write the whole passage down.
Right. So she has to learn to improve her reading efficiency. And I think that instead of having her write the whole passage, getting her to practice kind of summarizing 1 or 2 sentences and writing those 2 or 3 word summaries that I explained in the margins. I had another student who was like, he wanted to copy everything. And I would say, I would say, you're not going to have time to copy everything. What is the most important thing that you think the author wants you to understand? And so what I would do is I would ask him, like we would talk about a paragraph, and we would see, you know, what he understood from that paragraph. And then I would say, tell me where you got that information. Tell me where you got the most important point. And so he would highlight where he got the most important point. And we started noticing that, every time you got the most important point, it's usually the first 1 or 2 sentences of the paragraph. And so from that, he learned that if I really focus on understanding that first paragraph, then that first sentence, then that's the key to the paragraph. And so what he would do is he would read, and then he would look at that first sentence and he would go, this is what they want me to understand. And then what we would do is talk about the text structure, the fact that we use that first sentence is usually what we're talking about. And the supporting sentences are facts or examples or, you know, opinions, etc. And so once he started learning the structure of how writers write, it helped him learn to read better. So then he could focus on not trying to remember every single detail, but trying to comprehend that passage. You can always go back and look for details, but that first sentence really kind of helps you understand the overall passage and what the real meaning was that the author wanted you to get from it.
Okay.
So I would say giving her those strategies of annotating in the margins, doing those 2 or 3 word summaries, or even 4 or 5 word summaries if she has to, and then really focusing on what is that first sentence really telling me about this passage, and then going back and looking at her notes in the first sentences to get that in just a couple minutes instead of having to rewrite the entire thing.
Okay.
A lot of students, I'm also very verbal, and writing helps me. I still use a paper planner to this day with all the technological tools I use. That process of writing things down, it just helps you encode it in the brain better. And it's just not efficient. It's effective, it's just not efficient. So if you can teach her to encode in a smaller way with those 3 or 4 word summaries, it'll help her a lot.
Okay. Thank you. You did a wonderful job. I wish I could write it, but I can't. I don't know what's going on with my phone. Thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate that you spoke up anyway. Anyone else? All right, thanks everybody for spending this time with me. I know I'm over my time. I appreciate it though. Thank you so much, Salome, too. It was nice to not have to worry about that.
You're welcome. Great.
All right,
Great strategies. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, from our perspective in Cleveland, we for sure are dealing with the low level readers a lot.
Yeah.
We have very few coming through the program that are already at a proficient level of reading. So, or what we.
And now we're about to get more, Salome. We're about to be overrun because this other program is not taking the students anymore. So.
I mean, we are, yeah, and we're in a tough spot now. We're getting more students in, but it's really hard to service them with being online like we are.
It is. And we have students too who are coming to us now like, Carmen, I just miss being here. I just miss being in the building. Like I built my whole life around my class schedule, and now I like where do I go? What do I do? So I feel the same way. I can't wait for this to be over.
Thank you everybody for joining us. The other sessions are still in play, and then don't forget to join us at 12 o'clock for the scholarships that will be given out. So, all right, Carmen, I'll stop recording here.
Okay. Thank you. I'll stick around if anybody wants anything else, but